When I first moved into Willow Crest Estates, I expected a quiet, suburban life where I could enjoy my new home in peace. The neighborhood was picturesque, lined with well-manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and homes that exuded an air of tranquility. But what I didn't anticipate was the self-proclaimed dictator of the community, Karen Whitmore, the head of the HOA, a woman whose thirst for control knew no bounds. From the moment I arrived, she made it clear that I was an unwanted outsider in what she considered her neighborhood. It started small, thinly veiled warnings about my lawn needing proper edging, passive-aggressive notes about my trash bins being 1 inch off alignment, and complaints about the color of my porch light not being community standard. At first, I brushed it off, thinking this was just part of adjusting to a new neighborhood. But it quickly became obvious that this wasn't just Karen being a stickler for rules. She had targeted me. Every week, there was a new complaint, a new notice, a fresh headache designed to make me feel unwelcome. I played along at first, trimming the grass precisely to HOA specifications, repositioning my trash bins with military precision, even swapping out my porch light for a softer glow, thinking that would put an end to her nonsense. Didn't. Instead, the infractions escalated and Karen grew bolder. She began citing vague violations that didn't exist, issuing arbitrary fines, and threatening further action if I didn't comply. Then, one Tuesday morning, I checked my mail and found an official-looking envelope stamped with the HOA logo. I sighed, expecting yet another petty demand. But as I unfolded the letter, my breath caught. An eviction notice. I blinked, then blinked again. This had to be a joke. I owned my house outright. The HOA had zero authority to remove me. And yet, here was an official letter, signed by Karen herself, demanding that I vacate the premises within 30 days for failing to meet community guidelines. I laughed at first, until I saw the last line of the letter. Failure to comply may result in foreclosure proceedings. My stomach clenched. I knew that some HOAs had been known to exploit obscure bylaws, slapping homeowners with endless fines until they fell into financial distress, forcing them into foreclosure. It was a manipulative tactic, one that had ruined people before. But Karen had no idea that she was messing with the wrong person. I wasn't just a homeowner, I was a landlord. And in a twist of pure irony, Karen's house, the one she lived in while playing queen of the neighborhood, belonged to me. Years ago, I had invested in several rental properties in this area, and through sheer dumb luck, I had ended up being Karen's landlord. The irony was almost too much to handle. She had no clue that the very eviction notice she had sent me, I could send right back to her. I sat down at my desk, pulled up my property management records, and there it was, her lease agreement signed and dated, with my name listed as the property owner. My amusement turned to strategic calculation. I could have fired off an email, shutting down her nonsense immediately. But no, this needed to be handled in person. Karen had been running the HOA like her own personal kingdom for too long, bullying homeowners into submission. It was time to remind her who really had the power. That afternoon, I made my way toward Karen's house, the house I owned. She was outside, clipboard in hand, barking at a neighbor about their mailbox being 2 inches too tall. The poor guy looked exhausted, nodding along as Karen lectured him on community standards, like she was the supreme ruler of the land. When she saw me approaching, her eyes lit up with smug satisfaction. "I assume you got the notice," she said, crossing her arms, her tone laced with glee. "The HOA has made its decision, and I'm afraid you simply don't fit the community's expectations." I let her revel in her power trip for a moment, watching as she drank in her own authority, fully convinced she had one. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment before dropping the bombshell. "Oh, I got the notice," I said, pulling a thick manila folder from under my arm. "And I have a response." I extended the papers toward her, and for the first time her smirk wavered. Her eyes darted over the bold letters at the top of the document. Notice of lease termination. The color drained from her face. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, her arrogant posture shrinking with every second. What is this?" she stammered, her voice losing its edge. "That," I said, grinning, "is your official eviction notice." Karen's lips parted, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. No, 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 no. This is impossible. She clutched the paper so hard it crumpled in her grip, shaking her head in stunned disbelief. You can't do this. You don't have the authority. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, but I do. I took a step closer, watching as her entire world crumbled in real time. Karen, you sent me an eviction notice for a property I own. But funny thing, you've been living in a property that I own this entire time. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice just enough to let the weight of my words sink in. Which means, I have every legal right to evict you. The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the ground like a death sentence. She looked at me as if she had just watched a ghost walk through her front door. This isn't fair, she finally burst out, her voice cracking. I have rights. The HOA doesn't override state landlord-tenant laws. I cut in smoothly. You should know that, Karen. You love rules so much. And according to the lease you signed, you've already violated multiple clauses. I flipped through the document, running my finger along the violations. Let's see. Harassment of other residents? Check. Unauthorized modifications to the property. I gestured toward the massive HOA sign she had drilled into the front lawn, standing like a monument to her arrogance. Big check. I continued listing her violations, each one driving the nail deeper into the coffin of her reign of terror. When I finally snapped the folder shut, she looked completely unhinged. You can't be serious, she whispered, her face growing red with rage. Oh, I'm very serious, I said, crossing my arms. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. She bristled, her entire body tensing as she scrambled for a way out. I'll take this to the HO. I'll have them overturn it. They'll stop you, she declared, her voice bordering on hysteria. I let out a slow, amused chuckle. You still don't get it, do you? I shook my head. The HOA has zero say in what I do with my private property. And you're just a renter. I leaned in just slightly, my smile widening. And in exactly 30 days, you won't even be that. Karen staggered back, looking like she might actually faint. But instead of surrendering gracefully, she made her next move. Fine, she spat, her voice venomous. If you want a war, you've got one. She stormed back inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I smiled to myself as I turned to leave. Let her fight. The more she struggled, the more satisfying it would be when she finally fell. The following morning, I awoke to a predictable email from the HOA. Subject line: Illegal eviction notice of violation of HOA bylaws. Karen's desperation, gift-wrapped in bureaucracy. I sighed, already amused before even reading it. The message was laced with self-righteousness, accusing me of unlawful displacement and retaliatory actions against a community member. It threatened fines, legal action, and disciplinary measures if I didn't cease all hostile activity. I nearly laughed. Hostile activity? Karen had spent months terrorizing me, but the moment the tables turned, she was suddenly a victim? I cracked my knuckles and typed my response. Karen is not a community homeowner. She is my tenant. As the legal property owner, I have every right to terminate her lease for violations of rental agreements. If the HOA continues to interfere in private landlord-tenant matters, I will take legal action for harassment and overreach. Consider this your final warning. I hit send and sat back, waiting for the inevitable meltdown. Sure enough, that afternoon, a sharp knock rattled my front door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch, their expressions neutral but wary. Sir, we've received a report of an unlawful eviction, one of them said, flipping through a notepad. Your tenant, Karen Whitmore, claims you're attempting to remove her without proper legal proceedings. I sighed, stepping aside. Come on in, officers. Let me show you something. I led them to my desk and pulled up every document. Karen's signed lease agreement, the termination notice, the multiple infractions, and even the email exchange with the HOA. The officers took their time, flipping through each piece of evidence, exchanging glances. "This is airtight," one of them muttered, looking at his partner. "This isn't an unlawful eviction. It's a legal one." The other nodded, rubbing his temples like he'd seen this exact stunt before. "People think HOA rules override state laws," he said. "They don't." He shut the folder and looked at me. "You're in the clear." I smiled. "Appreciate it, officers." But before they left, I heard a shrieking voice from next door. Karen stormed out onto her porch, her face red with outrage. "Are you just going to let him get away with this?" she screeched, pointing a shaking finger at me like a witch accusing a heretic. "He's trying to destroy my life." One of the officers turned toward her, his patience clearly exhausted. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. He's well within his legal rights. If you continue calling the police over a private dispute, you could be charged with filing false complaints." Karen gasped as if someone had dumped ice water down her back. For the first time, she looked scared. Her safety net of power was fraying, and she knew it. The officers left. But Karen? She wasn't done yet. The next day, I received one final message from the HOA, this time from a legal representative. Karen had somehow convinced them to escalate the matter to their corporate attorneys. But what she failed to realize, I had my own. I forwarded every single document to my lawyer, who barely took an hour to reply. "They have no case. Proceed with the eviction." It was over. Karen had thrown every tantrum, pulled every string, and played every dirty trick, and none of it worked. Because now, it was eviction day. I stood across the street as a sheriff's deputy arrived, clipboard in hand. Karen's front door creaked open, and she appeared, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow with dread. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice unrelenting. "We're here to enforce a court-ordered eviction. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises." Karen snapped. "This is my home," she screamed, shoving past him and knocking a lamp off a table in fury. "This isn't fair. He tricked me. No, Karen," I said, cutting her off coldly. "You tricked yourself." She whirled on me, her chest heaving. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "We can make a deal. I can fix this." I tilted my head. Now she wanted to negotiate? After everything? I took a slow, deliberate step forward. No, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she'd crack a tooth. Then she lost it. She stormed back inside, and through the open door, I heard the sounds of pure destruction. Glass shattering, furniture crashing. She was trashing the place. "Ma'am, step away from the property," the deputy barked, moving toward the house. "Karen?" I called after her, shaking my head. "If you break anything, I'll be filing criminal charges." That stopped her. She stood there, her breath ragged, hands shaking with fury. Finally, with nothing left to say, she grabbed a single suitcase, stomped past me, and hurled herself into her car. She didn't look back. The locks were changed. The paperwork was signed. The queen of the HOA was gone. And the very next day, I received an email from the HOA board. "Dear homeowner, due to recent vacancies, there is now an open seat on the HOA board. We would like to extend an invitation for you to apply." I burst out laughing. The tyrant was gone, and now they wanted me to take her place? No thanks. But one thing was for sure. Karen would never forget the day she tried to evict the wrong man.